be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. I'll be honest, this gospel is one I would love to avoid, particularly Luke's version of the Beatitudes. Now, Matthew's version, of course, is, blessed are the poor in heart, and blessed is your spirit. It's very spiritual. This one is very pointed, very specific. There's a woe section, and it's uncomfortable. So we're just going to put that out there. It's uncomfortable. And as an old canon to the ordinary once said to me one time, they said, you know, they say, don't ever preach anything prophetic. That's usually leads to being run out of a parish. So, but here we go. Thanks a lot. But here we are with Luke's gospel. And Jesus, how we understand it is that this particular version of the Beatitudes may actually be very close to the original. Oh, dare I say that this probably is what Jesus said. Now, there's something kind of interesting about this, though. He is pointing out that there are going to be times of hunger, sorrow, pain. And you notice he doesn't then suddenly say, and I sprinkle fairy dust on it, and if you give me $10, I will double it to $20. He doesn't make any type of promise with that, does he? He doesn't say, I'm going to take that away necessarily. But he does seem to show that if you've been hungry, you will be full. If you have been in sadness and sorrow, you will be happy. In fact, even the poor, wow, there's the kingdom of heaven. And then even in these woes, it seems to be not necessarily saying, I'm going to snatch these good things away from you. But he's pointing out something pretty obvious. Well, if you're rich, you could very well, you had that consolation, but it may not be enough. If you're laughing now, you may very well next week may be crying. And if people are talking well about you, well, we know all about that. Next week they could be gossiping. Each of these is a condition of life. And the question is about those conditions is not just how do we respond, but where do we ground ourselves in these conditions? The condition of being hungry or being full, it's conditional. I'm sure before you ate breakfast this morning, you were hungry. And then you ate breakfast and you were full. The question is that, how does that affect your character? And should it? How does that affect your perspective? And should it? Perspective is important to keep, especially when we are confronted with things that change our condition. When we are within the slings and arrows of life. When bad things happen. conditions. To be poor, to be rich. To be happy, to be sad. It's conditional. It's like the blowing of the breeze. And in fact, I almost feel like this last week has been kind of a zing and zang back and forth of all of that within our very congregation. Ups and downs and sorrow, and at times laughter. But what are we rooted in? Now, Paul writes in his letter to the Corinthians, and let's just lay it on the line here, is that this cross and resurrection is not just a nice idea. It's not like, saying, maybe I should exercise more. That is a nice idea. I really should do that. I'm not sure that I am going to die for that idea. But, I might die if I don't. But the cross and resurrection are real. Jesus' being nailed to the cross is attested to by probably more sources than actually a lot of historical figures about whether or not those historical figures even existed. And the bizarre stories that follow of his resurrection, well, these are not cute little stories that people came up with. These weren't hallucinations, fantasies. Because I'll tell you what, people don't die for a fantasy. I might want to go out with Jason Statham. I'm not going to die for it. Not going to happen. And we are to be pitied if we don't grasp the reality of that. It's not just a good idea. But it is what we build our very faith around. It is where we plant our faith and where it grows in the knowledge that it is not just this life, that this is it. It's a promise of new life, of a world without end, of love that continues beyond the grave and walks and eats and has a jab in his side and holes in his palms. And so whatever the condition we are in, what is our character? And that's not to say that we don't lose perspective. We do. And it is easy to lose perspective when we are in the midst of a disaster or of a sorrow, a heartbreak, financial misstep. But it's also easy to lose that perspective when we're comfortable, we're well-fed, and forget who we are. We are people of the resurrection. And that is what we proclaim. And we proclaim it in laughter, and as it's testified even in our burial office, we proclaim it through our tears and alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. So whether rich or poor, happy or sad, when people say nice things about us or we're being persecuted, we remember who we are. People of the resurrection. Planted by that living water. And bearing fruit, even in drought.